All right, here we go. So thank you all for joining us for Buzzing with Stinkbugs program tonight. For those of you who may be new, my name is Bob Bruner. I am the A&R Extension Educator in Clay and Owen counties, right between Terre Haute and Bloomington, Indiana, for those of you out of state. I am an entomologist. I've been an entomologist for, I think, 12 years now, or maybe a little extra. And I've had the opportunity to study a lot of insects. In this part of my career, I find I typically specialize more in horticultural insects, so I like to talk about them quite a bit. And stink bugs, if you live where I live, is going to be an important topic to you. I live in an area where it is very, very common to get stink bugs inside your home. They will start entering your home right around the late summer, and they'll just keep appearing pretty much throughout the rest of the year almost, it feels like. And I get a lot of questions on how can I get rid of stink bugs? How can I get these things out of my house? What can I do to get them out of my garden or out of my crops? There are a few things. I wish I could tell you that there is a silver bullet that you can use that's guaranteed to get rid of stink bugs all year, all the time. But unfortunately, that would mean I'd probably be out of a job rather quickly, and it does not exist. So why don't we get a little bit of general information in on stink bugs and set us kind of all in the same spot. All right, so stink bugs are a very, very common group of insects throughout the United States. There are several species and genuses. The most common ones, if for those of you who have a little more insect knowledge, genuses like Acrosternum and Eucystis are very common. Those are our general green and brown stink bugs that you'll find everywhere. They're all members of a family of insects known as Pentatomidae, that penta indicating the 5 points that their bodies make up with that unusual shield shape they have. Most of the species in this group are going to be herbivorous. They're going to consume plants. However, there are species that are actually beneficial, and they will consume other insects. All of them that belong to this group, as far as I've been able to find, do produce a foul-smelling substance that acts as a defensive chemical that they exude out of glands in the sides of their bodies. And unfortunately, while they are primarily an outside pest, they can become pests indoors. And this is primarily due to the overwintering behavior of I should have put one particular species there that I'm going to talk about, an invasive species of stink bug that we unfortunately get to enjoy now. Oops, that went backwards. That's not right. So I wanted to give you guys also an idea of some of the different insects that are related to stink bugs. Stink bugs belong to a very large group of insects we generally refer to as Hemiptera. This is a group of insects that are all characterized by having an unusual set of mouth parts we call a rostrum. And you can actually see it in the picture with this cicada. This is one of our annual cicadas, not the brood cicada that we were dealing with this last summer. You can see that under its head, you can kind of see its beak, a very syringe-like looking organ is kind of poking out there from behind its front legs. Or if I show you a picture of this insect, this is also a member of Hemiptera. We call this one an assassin bug. And you could see that its beak is folded underneath its kind of stick-like head there, a very sharp looking thing. Where the cicada, it had its rostrum. I'll show you the picture again. It's very slender, very thin. It's intended to go into plant tissue to be able to get through the hard substances and begin to drain out tree sap and other fluids. Whereas this guy, his beak, his rostrum is intended to go into prey. So it's much more a piercing object intended to go through very, very tough substances to break through the exoskeleton of its prey, or to even some of these species may go for fish, depending on if they live in close proximity to the water. And of course, they're also related to our aphids. And they are just a great example of a species that has the basic body shape that you could see with cicadas, with stink bugs, and a lot of other members of this group. Stink bugs are just like these guys in many, many ways. They are primarily herbivores, like I said, so you can find them on all kinds of plants. And they have a particular feeding behavior that matches that. So when these guys feed on a plant, they are going to insert that long rostrum into the surface of the plant or fruit or seed or whatever they're currently going for. And they're going to take their time. They're going to extend mouth parts through that syringe to begin to drain out the sap and other nutrients that are going to be in the plant. Now, their diet is very sugary, so they're going to exude a lot of liquid waste wherever they go, though we often talk about aphids, who are the real criminals in this one, who exude honeydew. Stink bugs will do that just to a significantly lesser degree. Some of them, like I said, can be predatory, and they're going to have those stouter, shorter mouth parts like that assassin bug I was just showing you a picture of. And what they're going to do is they're going to wait for prey to just be unfortunate enough to cross their path and stab them with those mouth parts and drain them dry. But what I like doing is I like showing you guys damage, because trying to teach you how to identify an insect by its appearance can often be really challenging for those of you who may not have been around insects as much as I have, or as much as some of our more experienced gardeners have. So what I do is I like to teach you guys about the damage that you can look for when you're dealing with a stink bug. And this image right here really sums it up. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of you have seen this damage before. Damage appearance from stink bugs is going to take a very particular appearance. Leaf tissue is going to be drained of sap, and it may be mushy or even moist if you come into contact with it. And eventually it's just going to kind of dry up and shrivel up and fall off of the plant. Now, that's a general trait you're going to see with most sap-feeding insects if they go after leaves. Stink bugs are, not any kind of exception to that rule. However, stink bugs will also go after fruit and seeds, which is probably going to end up being their primary food source. So what's going to happen is when they feed on that fruit, you're going to see areas of sponginess and a lot of loss of color. Some of the stone fruit are going to have damaged areas on them that are going to stand out to you. And you may see areas where fruit will kind of cave in a process that we call cat facing, where you're just going to see divots in the fruit that looks like it just kind of fell inwards. Seeds are going to become darkened and shriveled in, say, the pods that they get fed on, especially in agricultural settings. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of what I mean here. So this is the first picture I was just showing you. You could really see that spongy area on this fruit. And if you look at that little darkened spot right in the middle of the spongy area, that's the feeding injury site. Those are where the mouth parts were stuck in there. And what's going to happen is that this insect is going to do this multiple times on a given fruit. And oftentimes it's going to be multiple insects doing it to one fruit. They won't really discriminate if there's another one there. They're going to prefer fruits that haven't been touched yet, but they're not going to be that picky. And you can even see some of the effects that are happening to this fruit already. So you could see the spongy area. But if you look over it, you could see that there's been a major loss of color in several areas. They've fed on more than one spot here. And then if you look close at in the back of the image, where you could see where the stem is attached or normally would be attached, you can actually see rot beginning to occur. Now, the rot doesn't necessarily mean it was caused by the stink bugs, but most likely they contributed to the process and caused the plant to lose health. Now, this image taken by our own John Obermeyer over on campus shows soybeans that have been attacked by stink bugs. And this is actually a very common injury that we see. Stink bugs are very common in soybean fields. What happened here is a stink bug found this pod and it attacked it and pierced into the developing seed. Now, this doesn't mean that the pod is ruined. That just means that seed will never develop properly. All the other seeds that are in the pod will still continue to develop. It just means that there will be some loss for the person who's currently managing this particular field, and they're going to have to keep their eye on that to manage whatever loss and risk that they're going to be experiencing from stink bugs. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into the habitats and the hosts that we're going to be dealing with. So I mentioned earlier, this is a very common insect. It's very cosmopolitan. That's a word that we entomologists love to use for insects that are spread everywhere, cosmopolitan. They're very common in crop fields. So if I were called out to a farmer's property during certain times of the year, especially the middle to late summer, I would expect to see quite a few stink bugs going for the corn and the soybeans as they're developing on their stalks or on their plants. However, you can very commonly find stink bugs also on tomatoes, peppers, and a lot of other garden plants. A few of my tomatoes this year were attacked. I'm sure your tomatoes also were as well. I don't think my peppers took very much damage at all, but basically anything that has a rind, anything that has a skin, and often plants that are just leafy tissue as well will get attacked by stink bugs. They will typically prefer more fruiting type plants. That's what they typically go after more often, but they will not discriminate. If they see like a good chunk of lettuce developing, they may try to feed on that as well. The thing about stink bugs too is that sometimes telling the adults and the nymphs apart can be a little bit challenging. The nymphs are going to resemble the adults. They are going to not have wings. So what's going to happen there? They don't have complete metamorphosis. They have what we call incomplete metamorphosis. When they hatch out of the egg, they just look like a miniature version of their adult selves, and their colors are going to vary a little more. So identifying them by species can be challenging. Now, why don't we go ahead and go through just a few species of herbivorous stink bugs. I'm not going to go through the more carnivorous species. I just didn't have time to be able to put together good information for you on that one. So I'm just going to hit the ones that I feel are going to be the biggest problems that you'll deal with. So our first man up here is the green stink bug. Sometimes you'll also see shield bugs that will also be green. These are very, very common. You'll see them attacking anything from potatoes to tomatoes. I see these more in gardens myself than I do in agricultural fields. But they are extremely common. Every kid in 4-H who does the entomology project has at least one green stink bug in their collection. Generally, you can get rid of them through just some manual labor. I wouldn't spray for any of these guys, but I'm going to go a little bit more into that. I at least wanted to cover that one there. If you do find stink bugs in your garden, picking them off and killing them in a bucket of soapy water is probably going to be your best bet. And they can be easily grabbed by hand. They will not try to attack you. They're pretty docile in that regard. They'll just try to fly away from you. The brown stink bug is also another very, very common stink bug that we deal with. This one, I believe, is a part of the Acrosternum genus. We do have another genus called Eucystis also, though that one is more typical in southern Indiana and the southern states. Again, these guys are going to be feeding on leaves. They're going to be feeding on fruits. I expect to see these more often in a crop field than I would the green stink bug, though that doesn't mean that they're necessarily restricted. You can find both of them there, though I expect the brown one more often. And this leads us to the third species that I wanted to cover. And this one is the really important one that I want you guys to remember. Our brown marmorated stink bug. This is an invasive species. And do me a favor, all of you, just go ahead and put in the chat, if you know what an invasive species is, just put the number 1. If you don't know what an invasive species is, you can either not answer or just put the number 2. So take a moment in the chat, put the number 1 in there if you know what an invasive species is. All right, so I'm seeing a good number of 1s there. That's good. So I will just cover this very, very briefly because it looks like a lot of you do understand what an invasive species is. An invasive species is a species that we have unintentionally moved from one area of the world to another. And when it is put in that new area, the environment has not adapted to its presence, which means it has no predators. The plants around it have adapted no defenses to it. And it means that that invader can now outcompete the native species very, very effectively. And we do see that with the brown marmorated stink bug. This one has many of the same behaviors as our native stink bugs. It feeds on plants. It will feed on fruit and stone fruit. It'll go into crop fields, etc. However, our native species have been evolving with a lot of the plants we've been growing for a very long time. And that means that the plants and other organisms have adapted their own defenses against these insects to try to prevent them from feeding. The brown marmorated stink bug, however, is brand new. It's only arrived in Indiana within the last several years. which means that adaptation hasn't happened yet. So there are no defenses against it. Predators may not recognize it as a prey item that can be consumed. So it can just keep developing and spreading, which is why we want to eradicate our invasive species as much as we can. Now, a little bit on the development of this insect, because I did talk about the nymphs a little bit earlier. So this is a little bit unlike your butterflies and moths. Like I said, they do incomplete metamorphosis. They're going to hatch out from an egg and they're going to look like a miniature version of their adult selves. Now, the nymphs, what they're going to do is when a butterfly starts as a caterpillar, that caterpillar is usually eating a different food substrate than the adult is. That's the advantage of a complete metamorphosis. The young are eating a different resource than the adults are, so the adults aren't competing with themselves. However, the nymphs of a stink bug, oh, Patty, you say there you're surprised the brown stink bug is a native. Yeah, we do have native brown stink bugs. They are quite native here. It's the brown marmorated stink bug. That's the problem. And I'm actually, you brought up something interesting that I wish I'd gone over a moment ago. So I'm going to take a step back. So let's look at our brown stink bug. You can see that it is fairly mottled. There's not much striping. Oftentimes, if you flip one of these guys over, you'll see that it has a green underbelly. These are our native brown stink bugs, and they are fairly cosmopolitan. The biggest concentration of them is probably going to be in the more southern areas, though we do have them, like in Terre Haute, where I'm sitting right now. You can definitely find brown stink bugs. However, they're being outcompeted by these guys, the brown marmorated stink bug. This you could tell from the brown stink bug because of the striping. Now you can see that the legs have striping, the antenna have striping. Sometimes the back of the insect is going to be duller than this image. I chose an image that stood out a lot more intentionally just to make that striping pop out to you. But this is the problem insect. Look for those stripes. Look for that really, really brighter modeling. You can see at the edges of the abdomen, there's more accented striping there as well. This one's just a very, very contrasted image, or contrasted individual, I should say. Most of them are going to be a little bit more dull in color compared to this guy. Yeah, we could talk about that more in a moment. I want to get through this part with the nymphs here. So I was mentioning caterpillars, they will actually eat different food resources than the adults, so they're not competing with each other. Nymphs of stink bugs, however, they don't do that. What they'll do is as soon as they hatch out, all the siblings are going to be eating the food substrate that the adult laid them on. And then oftentimes the adults will be consuming similar foods. It's just that since these are very mobile insects, you're not going to find that many adults on a given plant unless they really, really like that plant. So the chances of them outcompeting their own young probably isn't that high. Now, the nymphs are going to be more brightly colored than the adults to warn predators about the taste, because they still have that bitter chemical that the adults do. You can see this is a great example of a stink bug nymph that's just very, very brightly colored. And they'll vary a lot from their adult selves. I believe this is one of our native stink bugs. This is just what it looks like as a nymph. You can also see it here with this nymph. This image I really, really like, because if you look at kind of where the shoulders of the stink bug are, you could see the wing pads developing. You can actually tell where the wings are eventually going to come in. Because what's going to happen, this little guy is going to feed, and then he's going to molt, and he's going to shed his skin several times until eventually the last time he molts is when his wings are going to be fully developed, and he can start drying them out, lifting them up, and start to be able to fly. And I think that's just a fascinating trait of these insects, but I'm an entomologist. So let's talk a little bit about the management in gardens for these insects. And I'm only going to go over this briefly because honestly, I want to talk about the management in homes because I find that to be the biggest problem that a lot of people have. Now, the management in gardens is actually fairly straightforward. Since stink bugs are a very resilient group of insects and they're very mobile, trying to do a pesticide application is at best hit or miss. You could go there, you could spray something down while they're present. They could get out of it. They could just walk away and avoid getting exposure. The nymphs are going to be weaker or more susceptible to it because they can't fly. and they're not gonna be running around a whole lot. So treating the nymphs is going to probably be a better bet. But honestly, in my opinion, your best bet is to just remove them physically. Eggs are going to be laid on plants, and you're probably going to see this little stack of eggs tightly bound together, close to each other in neat little lines. Those are probably going to be your stink bugs and your squash bugs who have laid eggs. And you could gently scrape those off of plants so long as you don't damage the plant tissue itself. The nymphs are going to be brightly colored. They're going to be obvious, so you can always just scrape them off and put them in a bucket of soapy water. And then, of course, the adults are much larger, and honestly, they're not that hard to catch by hand. And the great thing is that they aren't going to harm you. They can't bite you. They don't have the necessary mechanics to be able to actually harm a person, even if they wanted to. All they want to do is get away. So they're just going to try to fly out of your hand. The only thing you have to do is just be ready for it, because when they buzz their wings, when you're holding them, they'll startle you very easily. So all you got to do is don't close your hand on them like you're making a fist and squashing them. Just make your hand into kind of a cage and then get to where you're just going to either put them in a bucket of soapy water or release them somewhere else so they're away from your area. All right, so problems in the home. This is the one that I really like to focus on, because this is the area where we kind of lose out. We don't know what to do. Now, one thing that I'm going to preface this with is that most of the problems of the home are entirely related to this stink bug, the brown marmorated stink bug. This is because this insect in its native environment overwinters in areas where it's along cliff faces or mountainous walls where they can find cracks and crevices to hide in, and they'll stay there for the entire winter. They do this by looking at where they're seeing light reflecting off of areas. However, in our area of Indiana that we live in, we don't have many cliff faces or mountains or anything like that, but our houses reflect light. So what they do is they're drawn by the heat, which is they perceive as light reflecting off the surface, and they'll buzz right in thinking they found a great spot to overwinter. Now, this can be really, really problematic depending on where you live. Stink bugs all tend to do this at the same time. And in some areas, you can just get a massive number of stink bugs flying into your home. And if you're one of the unfortunate people who has an allergy to stink bugs, which is a real thing, you can have a really serious problem, because stink bugs do put off some certain allergens that some people are very sensitive to. And it can just be awful for those folks. They have to really clean out their house of stink bugs when they fly inwards. Now, I'm trying to go to the next slide. My button's not working. I'm sorry. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we can manage these guys in our homes. What can we do to try to get rid of them? So like I mentioned earlier, the only home invader in terms of stink bugs is going to be our brown marmorated stink bug. You can get brown stink bugs and green stink bugs to go in your home. It'll happen. You'll find them in there, but they're not the real big problem. They're not the mass of stink bugs you find coming in your house. This is going to be the brown marmorated stink bug. Like I said earlier, this guy was accidentally introduced to the United States from Asia, and it is spread from the eastern US for several years now. And like I said, their instincts cause them to perceive our homes as viable overwintering habitat. Now, there is a caveat to this, though. They can't survive in our homes. When they go into their overwintering state, that means that their bodies are prepared for colder temperatures. The temperatures inside our homes are much warmer than that. So their bodies can't handle that warmth. They're supposed to go dormant. They're supposed to hibernate. And inside our homes, they can't. They'll just eventually die. And unfortunately, that just makes a big mess for us. So the best thing to do, the best start you can get at preventing them from coming in, is to check for any potential entry points. Stink bugs are going to fly in through open doors, open windows, cracks that you may have in walls and windowsills, under your doors, that kind of thing. Remember, these are very flat insects, and even as big as they are relative to other insects, they can get into a lot of places. But the one that I have personally found in my home to be the biggest problem is actually me, or people. Stink bugs are active flyers. and they will just bump into you as they fly and grab onto your clothing. And then as soon as you're inside your home, they're going to buzz off and do whatever. And now they're inside your home. So you'll actually have to monitor that a little bit as you go. Manual removal is going to be your best bet, though. There is no chemical that I would ever recommend you spray into your home to try to remove a stink bug problem. That would be very dangerous to you and the members of your family. And honestly, it probably wouldn't work. Vacuuming, removing them by hand, those are going to be your best bets. Unfortunately, they're going to have the pleasant side effect of making your pets sick because your pets are going to try to help you remove stink bugs. However, that bitter flavor can make your dog's stomach upset, as I've discovered to my own personal tragedy. Now, the good thing about stink bugs coming in your house is they can't cause structural damage. They lack an ability to chew or bore holes into wood. They are not going to try to make a nest per se. They are just trying to find a spot to hide and sit very, very still. They also don't produce any kind of substance that could cause soft rot to occur in wood. So they're not going to ruin a veneer or something like that. Now, what I do want to counsel you guys on is to look at your curtains. Look very closely at them, especially the curtains that are like Venetian blinds that'll fold up in a kind of xylophone, or I'm sorry, an accordion shape. They will hide between those folds, those pleats, and they will stay there for an entire winter. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when they stay there, oftentimes they will also do their business there, and they can accidentally stain your curtains. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a permanent stain. It's not like they're putting some horrifying chemical on it, but it does mean that you may unfurl your curtains one day in the middle of winter and discover little black spots over a variety of areas. So check your curtains throughout the entire fall and winter to keep them out of there, and that way you don't have to do any extra cleaning that you don't want to. And like I said, if you're a pet owner, please beware. These guys can make your companions sick when they try to eat them. Thankfully, they're not a dangerous kind of sick. They're not poisoning them. They'll just give them an upset stomach and they'll probably throw up. So what I want to do is I want to leave you guys with this image of a home invader, a brown marmorated stink bug on someone's curtains. And I want to open it up to any questions. If you guys want to go ahead and unmute and ask them or put them in the chat, you are welcome to.